king of the Canadian Hill. Dreadful drawings in our Ontario. The Lavender Town Syndrome. The Lavender Town Syndrome, also known as Lavender Town Tone or Lavender Town Suicides, was a peak in suicides and illnesses of children between the ages of 7 to 12, shortly after the release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, back in February 27, 1996. Rumors say that these suicides and illnesses only occurred after the children playing the game reached Lavender Town, whose theme music had extremely high frequencies that studies showed that only children and young teens can hear, since their ears are more sensitive. Due to the lavender tone, at least 200 children supposedly committed suicide, and many more developed illnesses and afflictions. The children who committed suicide usually did so by hanging or jumping from heights. Those who did not acted irrationally, complained of severe headaches after listening to the Lavender Town's theme. Although Lavender Town now sounds differently depending on the game, this mass hysteria was caused by the first Pokemon game released. After the Lavender Tone incident, the programmers had fixed Lavender Town's theme music to be at a lower frequency, and since then, children were no longer affected by it. One video appears in 2010 using special software to analyze the audio of Lavender Town's music. When played, the software created images of the unknown near the end of the audio. This raised a controversy, since the unknown didn't appear until the Generation 2 games, Silver, Gold, and Crystal. The unknown translate to leave now. Are you recording this phone call conversation? Fantastic. Alright, here we go. So, do any of you remember those Mickey Mouse cartoons from the 1930s? The ones that were just put out on DVD a few years ago? Well, I hear there was one that was unreleased to even the most avid classic Disney fans. According to sources, it's nothing special. It's just a continuous loop, like the Flintstones, of Mickey walking past 6 buildings that goes on for 2 or 3 minutes before fading out. Unlike the cutesy tunes put in though, the song in this cartoon was not a song at all, just a constant banging on a piano for 1.5 minutes before going to white noise for the remainder of the film. It wasn't the jolly old Mickey we've come to love either. Mickey wasn't dancing, not even smiling, just kind of walking as if you and I were walking, with a normal facial expression. But for some reason his head tilted side to side as he kept this dismal look. Up until a year or two ago, everyone believed that after it cut to black, and that was it. When Leonard Maltin was reviewing the cartoon to be put in the complete series, he decided it was too junk to be on the DVD, but wanted to have a digital copy due to the fact it was a curation of Walt. When he had a digitized version up in his computer to look at the file, he noticed something. The cartoon was actually 9 minutes and 4 seconds long. This is what my source emailed to me in full. He is a personal assistant of one of the higher executives at Disney and acquaintance of Mr. Maltin himself. After it cut to black, it stayed like that until the 6th minute before going back into Mickey walking. The sound was different this time. It was a murmur. It wasn't a language, but more like a gurgled cry. As the noise got more indistinguishable and loud over the next minute, the picture began to get weird. The sidewalk started to go up in directions that seemed impossible based on the physics of Mickey's walking, and the dismal face of the mouse slowly curling into a smirk. On the 7th minute, the murmur turned into a blood-curdling scream, that kind of scream painful to hear, and the picture was getting more obscure. Colors were happening that shouldn't have been possible at the time. Mickey's face began to fall apart. His eyes rolled on the bottom of his chin like two marbles in a fishbowl, and his curled smile was pointing upward on the left side of his face. The buildings became rubble floating in midair, and the sidewalk was still impossibly navigating in warped directions. A few seeming inconceivable with what we as humans know about direction. Mr. Maltin got disturbed and left the room, sending in an employee to finish the video and take notes of everything happening up until the last second, and afterward immediately store the disc of the cartoon into the vault. This distorted screaming lasted until 8 minutes and a few seconds in, and then abruptly cuts to Mickey Mouse face at the credits of the end of every video with what sounded like a broken music box playing in the background. This happened for about 30 seconds, and whatever was in that remaining 30 seconds, I haven't been able to get a sliver of information about it. From a security guard working under me who was making rounds outside that room, I was told after the last frame, the employee stumbled out of the room with pale skin, saying, "Real suffering is not known," 7 times before speedily taking the guard's pistol and offing himself on the spot. The thing I could get out of Leonard Maltin was that the last frame was a piece of Russian text that roughly said, "The sights of hell bring its viewers back in." As far as I know, no one else has seen it, but there has been dozens of attempts at getting the file on rapid share by the employees inside the studios, all of whom have been promptly terminated of their jobs. Whether it got online or not is up for debate, but if rumors serve me right, it's online somewhere under suicidemouse.avi. If you ever find a copy of the film, I want you to never view it and contact me by phone immediately, regardless of the time. When a Disney death is covered up as well as this, it means this has to be something huge. Get back to me. Signed, TR. I've yet to find a copy of this, but it's out there. I know it. Okay, I'm gonna hang up the phone now. Bye-bye.
Does anyone remember this kid show? It was called Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found a reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time. Like 4 p.m.
Oh, it seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and I was 9 years old in 72. Candle Cove. Was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl.
Yes. Okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, real low budget. His head was on an old porcelain baby doll. Looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF though.
Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what you mean, Sky Shale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple of months in 71, not 72. I was 12, and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove. It was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughing Stock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was a calliope music constantly playing. I don't remember the girl's name, Janice or Jade or something. I think it was Janice.
Thank you, Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughing Stock and Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea as it had that awful Edwin voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched it from the wooden plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked.
Oh, I remember now too. Do you remember this part, Sky Shale? You have to go inside.
Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw with the fishing line that opened and closed it. It just looks so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above a really tall, narrow teeth.
I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when the show was on. Nightmare Fuel.
That wasn't the villain. The puppet with the mustache? That was the villain's sidekick? Horse horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that it meant he had only one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then.
Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker? What kind of kids show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen while the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just like a dirty skeleton wearing the brown top hat and cape. His glass eyes were so big for his skull, Christ almighty.
Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up like crazy? Was it supposed to be children's skin?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I remember his mouth didn't open and close. His jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl, but at the camera, and said, "To grind your skin."
I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended and the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces and they were just screaming, and the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically and just screaming. The girl was moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it.
I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode, fella.
No, not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show.
Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that. But I swear to God, I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed.
Oh God, yes. The little girl Janice, I remember seeing her shake, and then the Skin Taker screaming through his gnarling teeth, his jaw crooning so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off, and that's the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother, and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on.
I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her when I was little in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, if she remembered a kid show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why. And she said, because I used to think it was so strange that you said, "I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now, Mom," and then you would tune the TV on to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show.
Okay, I need your help with this. This is not a copy pasta. This is a long read, but I feel like my safety or well-being could be very well dependent on this. This is a video game related specifically Majora's Mask, and this is the creepiest shit that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Having said that, I recently moved into my dorm room, starting as a sophomore in college, and a friend of mine gave me his old Nintendo 64 to play. I was stoked, to say the least. I could finally play all those old games of my youth that I hadn't touched in at least a decade. His Nintendo 64 came with one yellow controller and a rather shoddy copy of Super Smash Bros. And while beggars can't be choosers, needless to say, it didn't take long until I became bored with beating up level 9 CPUs. That weekend, I decided to drive around a few neighborhoods, about 20 minutes or so off campus, hitting up the local garage sales, hoping to score some good old deals from ignorant parents. I ended up picking up a copy of Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye, fuck yeah, F-Zero, and 2 other controllers for $2. Satisfied, I began to drive out of the neighborhood when one last house caught my attention. I still have no idea why it did. There was no cars there, and only one table was set up with random junk on it. But something sort of drew me there. I usually trust my gut on these things, so I got out of the car, and I was greeted by an old man. His outward appearance was, for lack of a better word, displeasing. It was odd. If you asked me to tell you why I thought he was displeasing, I couldn't really pinpoint anything. There was just something about him that put me on edge. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is that if it wasn't in the middle of the afternoon and there was other people within shouting distance, I would have not even thought of approaching this man. He flashed a crooked smile at me and asked what was I looking for. I immediately noticed that he must be blind in one of his eyes. His right eye had that glossed over look on it. I forced myself to look to his left eye instead. Trying not to offend, I asked him if he had any old video games. I was already wondering how I could politely excuse myself from the situation if he would tell me he had no idea what a video game was. But to my surprise, he had a few ones in an old box. He assured me he'd be back in a jiffy and turned and head back into the garage. As I watched him hobble away, I couldn't help but notice he was selling on his table, littered across his table, rather particular paintings, various artworks that looked like ink blots that a psychiatrist might show you. Curious, I looked through them. It was obvious why no one was visiting this guy's garage sale. These weren't exactly authenticity pleasing, but as I came to the last one, for some reason, it almost looked like Majora's Mask. The same heart-shaped body with little spikes protruding outward. Initially, I had just thought that since I was secretly hoping to find that game in these garage sales, some fraudulent bullshit was projecting itself into the ink blots, but given the events that happened afterward, I'm not so sure now. I should have asked the man about it. I wish I would have asked the man about it. After staring at the Majora-shaped blot, I looked up, and the old man was suddenly there again, arm's length in front of me, smiling at me. I'll admit I jumped out of reflex and I laughed nervously as he handed me a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was a standard gray color, except that someone had written Majora on it in black permanent marker. I got butterflies in my stomach as I realized what the coincidence this was and asked him how much he wanted for it. The old man smiled at me and told me that I could have it for free, but it used to belong to a kid who was about my age that didn't live here anymore. There was something weird about how the man phrased that, but I couldn't really pay attention to it then. I was too caught up in not only finding this game, but getting it for free. I reminded myself to be a bit skeptical since it looked like a pretty shady cartilage. There's no guarantee it would work. But then the optimist inside me interjected that maybe it was some kind of beta version or pirated version of the game that was all I needed to be back on Cloud 9. Thanks to the man, and the man smiled at me and wished me well, saying, "Goodbye then." At least that's what it sounded like to me all the way in the car ride home. I had a nagging doubt that the man had said something else. My fears were confined when I booted up the game. To my surprise, it worked just fine. And there was a save file named simply Ben. "Goodbye, Ben?" He was saying, "Goodbye, Ben." I felt bad for the man. Obviously a grandparent, and obviously going senile. Then I, for some reason or another, reminded him of his grandson, Ben. Out of curiosity, I looked at the save file, eyeballing it. I could tell that it was pretty far in the game. He had almost all the masks, 3 of 4 remains of the bosses. I noticed that he had used an owl statue to save the game. He was on day 3, and the stone tower temple with hardly an hour left before the moon would crash. I remember thinking that it was a shame that he had come so close to beating the game, but he had never finished it. I made a new file named Link out of tradition and started the game, ready to relive my childhood. For such a shady looking game cartilage, I was impressed in how smoothly it ran. Literally just like a retail copy of the game, save for a few minor hiccups here and there, like textures being where they shouldn't be, random flashes of cutscenes at odd intervals, but nothing too bad. However, the only thing that was a little unnerving was at times the NPCs would call me Link, and other times they would call me Ben. I figured it was a bug, a fluke in the programming causing our files to get mixed up or something. It did creep me out, though. It was around after I had beaten the Woodfall Temple that I regrettably went into the save files and deleted Ben. I had intended to preserve the file out of respect of the game's original owner, but it's not like I needed the 2 files anyway. Hoping that would solve the problem, it did, and it didn't. Now, NPCs wouldn't call me anything. Where my name should be in the dialogue was just a blank space. My save file name would be called Link, though. Frustrated, and with homework to do, I put the game down for a day. I started playing the game again last night, getting the lens of truth, and working my way towards completing the Snowhead Temple. Now, some of you more hardcore Majora Mask players know about the 4th day glitch. For those who don't, you can Google it, but the gist of it is right as you clock to hit 00000 on the final day. You talk to the astronomer and look through the telescope. If you time it right, the countdown disappears and you essentially have another day to finish whatever you were doing. Deciding to do the glitch and try to finish the Snowhead Temple, I happened to get it right on the first try, and the time counter at the bottom disappeared. However, when I pressed B to exit the telescope, instead of being greeted by the astronomer, I found myself in the Majora boss fight at the end of the game. The trippy boxed-in arena, starting at Skull Kid hovering above me. There was no sound, just him floating in the air above me, and the background music, which was regular to the arena, but still creepy, Immediately, my palms began to sweat. This was definitely not normal. Skull Kid never appeared here. I just tried moving around the arena, and no matter where I went, Skull Kid would always be there, facing me, looking at me, not saying anything. But what happened though, as he kept up around 60 seconds, I thought the game had bugged out or something, but I was beginning to doubt that very much. I was about to reach for the reset button when text appeared on my screen. You're not sure why, but you apparently had a reservation. I initially recognized that text. You get that message when you get the room key from Anju at the Stockpot Inn. But why was it playing here? I refused to entertain the notion that it was almost as if the game was trying to communicate with me. I started to navigate the room again, testing to see if that was some sort of trigger that enabled me to interact with something here. Then I realized how stupid I was. To even think that someone would reprogram the game like this was absurd. Sure enough, 15 seconds later, another message appeared on the screen, and again, like the first one, it was already pre-existing phrase. Go to the lair of the temple boss. Yes? No. I paused for a second, contemplating what I should press and how the game would react. When I realized that I couldn't select no, taking a deep breath, I pressed yes, and the screen faded to white, with the words "Dawn of a New Day," with the subtext line beneath it, where I was ported to filled me with the most intense sense of dread, impending fear I had ever experienced. The only way I can describe the way I felt here was having this feeling of inexplicable depression on a profound scale. I am normally not a depressed person, but the way I felt here was a feeling that I didn't even know existed. It was such a twisted, powerful presence that seemed to wash over me. I appeared in some kind of weird Twilight Zone version of the clock town. I walked out of the clock tower as you normally do when you start day one, only to find that all the inhabitants were gone. Usually, with the fourth day glitch, you can still find the guards and the dog that runs around outside the tower. This time, they were all gone. What replaced them was the ominous feeling that there was something out there, in the same area as me, that was watching me. I had 4 hearts to my name and the hero's bow, but at this point, I wasn't even concerned with my avatar. I felt I personally was in some kind of danger. Perhaps the most chilling thing was the music. It was the Song of Healing, ripped straight from the game itself, but it played in reverse. The music would get louder, building up so I should expect something to pop out at you, but nothing ever did, and the constant loop began to wear on my mental state. Every now and then, I would hear the faint laugh of the happy masked salesman in the background. Just quiet enough so I wasn't sure if I was hearing things, but just loud enough to keep me determined to find them. I looked in all 4 zones of the clock town, only to find nothing. No one. Textures were missing. The West Clock Town had me walking on air. The entire area felt broken, hopelessly broken, as the reverse Song of Healing repeated for what must have been the 50th time. I remember standing in the middle of the clock town, realizing that I had never felt so alone in a video game before. As I walked through the ghost town, I didn't know whether it was the combination of the out-of-place textures and the atmosphere and the haunting melody of a once peaceful and soothing song being butchered and distorted, but I was literally on the verge of tears and I had no idea why. I hardly ever cry, but something had gripped me here, and this powerful sense of depression that was both foreign and crippling. I tried leaving Clocktown, but every time I attempted to zone out, the screen would fade to black, and I would just zone into another part of Clocktown. I tried playing the ocarina. I wanted to escape, and I did not want to be here. But every time I played the Song of Time or the Song of Soaring, it would only say, "Your notes echo far," but nothing happens. By this point, it was obvious the game didn't want me to leave, but I had no idea why it was keeping me here. I didn't want to go inside the buildings. I felt that I would be too vulnerable there to whatever I was terrified of. I didn't know why, but I came up with the idea that maybe I drowned myself in the laundry pool and I could spawn somewhere else and leave this place. As I zoned in and ran towards the pool, that's when it happened. Link grabbed his head, and the screen flashed for a brief moment of happy masked salesman smiling at me, not Link. Me with Skull Kid's scream playing in the background, and when the screen returned, I was staring at the Link statue playing the song Elegy of Emptiness. I screamed as the thing just stared back at me with that haunting facial expression. I turned around and ran out, back to the South Clock town, and to my horror, the fucking statue followed me in only a way I can compare this to the weeping angels from Doctor Who. Every so often, at random intervals, the animation would play of the statue appearing behind me. It was like the thing was chasing me, or I don't even want to fucking say it, haunting me. By this point, I was on the verge of hysterics, but not even once did the thought of turning off the console occur to me. I don't know why. I was so wrapped up in it, the terror felt also real. I tried to shake the statue, but it would literally appear right behind me every single time. Link started to begin to make weird animations I had never seen him do before. He would flail his arms around or spasm randomly, and the screen would cut to the happy masked salesman smile again for a brief moment before I was face to face with that fucking statue again. I ended up running into the Swords Master's Jojo and ran to the back. I don't know why, but in my panic I just wanted some kind of assurance that I'm not alone here. To my dismay, I found no one. But as I turned to leave, the statue cornered me in the cubby in the back. I tried attacking the statue with my sword, but to no avail. Confused, I backed into a corner. I just stared at the statue, waiting for it to kill me. Suddenly, the screen flashed again to the happy masked salesman, and Link turned to face my screen, standing upright, mirroring the statue, looking at me with his copy literally staring at me. Whatever was left on the fourth wall was completely shattered while I ran out of the dojo, terrified. Suddenly, the game warped me to an underground tunnel, and the reverse song of healing queued up again as I was given a brief moment of rest before the statue started appearing behind me again, this time more aggressively. I could only take a few steps before it would summon behind me again. I hurriedly made my way out of the tunnel, and it appeared in the southern clock town. I ran aimlessly in sheer panic. Suddenly, a readied scream, and the screen faded to black as Dawn of a New Day and line appeared again. The screen faded in, and I was standing on top of the clock tower with Skull Kid hovering over me again, silent. I looked up, and the moon was back, looming just meters above my head, but the Skull Kid just stared at me hauntingly with that fucking mask. A new song was playing. The Stone Tower Temple theme played in reverse. In some sort of desperate attempt, I equipped my bow and fired off a shot at the Skull Kid. And it actually hit him, and he played an animation of him reeling back. I fired again. On the third arrow, a text appeared saying, "That won't do any good. He. And I was picked up off the ground, levitated upwards on my back, and then Link screamed as he burst into flames, instantly killing him. I jumped when this happened. I had never seen this move used by anyone in the game, and the Skull Kid himself didn't have any moves. As death screen played, my lifeless body still burning, the Skull Kid laughed, and the screen faded to black, only to have me reappear in the same place. I decided to charge him, but the same thing happened. Link's body was lifted off the ground, and by some unknown force, he immediately burst into flames, again, killing him. This time, during the death screen, the faint sounds of the reverse song of healing could be heard. On my third and final try, I noticed that there was no music playing this time, that there was an eerie silence. I remembered that in the original encounter with the Skull Kid, you were supposed to use the ocarina to either travel back in time to summon the giants or attempt to play the Song of Time before I could hit the last note. Link's body would once again horrifically explode into flames as he died. As the death screen neared its end, I began to chug, and as the cartilage was trying to process a lot of something, when the screen came to, it was the same screen as the first 3 times, except this time Link was lying on the ground, dead in a position I had never seen in game before, his head tilted towards the camera with the Skull Kid floating above him. I couldn't move. I couldn't press any buttons. All I could do was just stare at Link's dead body. After around 30 seconds of this, the game simply fades out with the message, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" before kicking you out of the title screen. Upon getting back to the title screen and starting again, I noticed my save file was no longer there. Instead of Link, it was replaced with "Your turn." Your turn had 3 hearts, 0 masks, and no items. I selected Your Turn, and immediately when I did, I was returned to the clock tower rooftop scene with my Link dead and the Skull Kid hovering over, with the Skull Kids laughing, looping again and again. I quickly hit the reset button, and when the game booted up, there was no more save file added. Below Your Turn, entitled Ben. Ben's save file is right back where it was before I deleted it, at the Stone Tower Temple with the moon almost crashing. I turned the game off at that point. I'm not superstitious, but this was way too fucked up for me. I haven't played it at all today. Hell, I didn't even get any sleep last night. I kept hearing the reverse Song of Healing music in my head and just remembering the sense of dread I felt exploring the clock town. I drove back to the old man's house today to ask him some questions with a buddy of mine. No way I was going back there alone, only to find that there's a for sale sign on the front yard, and when I rang the door, no one was home. Now I'm back here, writing down the rest of my thoughts and recording what happened. Sorry if some of this is grammatical errors and whatnot. I'm running on no sleep here. I'm terrified of this game, even more now that I relived it a second time writing this all down. I feel that there's more to it than meets the eye, and that there's something calling to me to investigate this further. I think Ben is something in this equation, but I don't know what. And if I could get a hold of the old man, then I could be able to find some answers. I need another day or so to recuperate before tackling this game again. It's already taken a toll on my sanity. Next time I do this, I'm going to be recording my footage all the way through. The idea to record only came to me towards the end. So you see the last few minutes of what I saw, including the skull kid and the eulogy statue, but it's all on YouTube here. I'm going to stay on this thread for a little while longer before I fall asleep to answer any questions you guys might have, or hopefully listen to your ideas or theories to help me shed some light into this, or maybe things I should try to do. I think I'm going to play Ben's file tomorrow to see what happens. Maybe I was supposed to do that all along. I don't believe in paranormal shit. But this is a little fucked up. But maybe this Ben guy is just a really good hacker, programmer. I don't want to think about the alternatives if he isn't. That's the end of the copy/paste. I'm hoping that this is some kind of running gag that the developers had and that other people have gotten gag or hacked copies of a game like this. This just really scares me.